I'm Mike Brilla, host of the Inspired Teacher Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome, everybody, to this episode of the Ninth Grade Experience Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Dutchko. Ninth grade can be challenging. Let's experience it together. And on today's episode, we have Dr. Veirdre Jackson with us. She is a CEO, an author, a trainer, and she operates Living Strong Consulting. And she came in to present to our faculty earlier in the school year, and her message was really awesome and very student-centered. So I wanted to have her on to discuss student mental health and just a way of getting in and fitting into your environment. And we also went on to talk about successful characteristics of ninth grade students. And that really framed our conversation about how you can improve your mental health, about how you can improve your mental attitude, and just to kind of understand that a lot of people are going through a lot of different things. And this episode is really great. It's a good one here as we kind of end the year and we move into a new year to kind of reflect on, to think about how you can implement some of these things that we talk about in the video as well. So lots of great insights here from Dr. Jackson. We'll have links in our show notes and other things to be able to give some more resources to you. But we're excited to share this episode. If you want to look back on any other episodes, we've done many other episodes on student mental health. You can go back to ninthgradeexperience.com. Just go in the search bar, type in mental health, and you'll come up with several of our episodes that have focused on that too. And don't forget to check us out on all of the social media that we have. We have the Ninth Grade Experience TikTok page. We have the Instagram page. We have YouTube Shorts, and all of our full episodes are available on YouTube as well too. And the audio podcast you can obviously listen to anywhere where you get podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all those places as well too. So we're excited to bring you this episode. It's a deep one. It's a long one, but I think it has lots of great insights for you to improve upon in the new year. So here is Dr. Veirdre Jackson. We're here with Dr. Veirdre Jackson, who came to us here at Emmaus High School in the month of October to do a presentation on trauma-informed training. And I thought that the information that she shared at that point was really awesome. And I thought it could apply to a lot of our ninth grader parents, students, and people that work with them. So thanks for coming on to the show. We really appreciate it.
Chris, it is my pleasure. I'm excited to be able to connect and share and support all that you're doing.
We always like to start off with our guest by asking them the question of what was their ninth grade experience like. So I always tell this to the adults, you'd never have to reveal your age or your graduating year, but if you could just give us a little bit of a history or background of what your ninth grade experience was like, that would be awesome.
Yes. So you have taxed my memory because I'm not, I'm quite a few decades away from that time. But thinking about my ninth grade year, I had actually been admitted into a private school. You had to test into the school, and it was actually predominantly white. So there were only 4 Black females who were allowed into the school at that time. And so I remember that year being one in which I found a group of friends that we allowed ourselves to be very different, but leveraged our relationships to help us shine and step outside of our comfort zone. Because there were only 4 of us in the entire grade level. There weren't many people who looked like us or who had the same lived experiences as us, but I actually sat and thought about who we were at that time. We had one we just knew she was going to be a neuroscientist. She was so smart. I was the athlete. as well as a really strong leader. I had another friend she was the communicator. If we needed her to say anything to anyone, we put her out front. And the other young lady, she was so pristine. As the young people would say today, she was very demure. And we all just allowed our gifts to make room for us, but our community allowed us and encouraged us to step out and make relationships, new relationships, people we had never met before. But we leveraged our security to be able to step outside of our comfort zone and make amazing friends that were really diverse and created experiences and memories that I actually still have decades later.
And that's, we always come back to when we ask this question, there's lots of things there that we're going to go into with what you just said. But one of the always like the follow-ups is like, was there something in your ninth grade year that happened that kind of led you on the path that you're on right now? Like, so you're an author, you're a trainer, you host a podcast, you're all over the place talking about all these issues related to trauma, related to, just the general human experience. Is there something during that ninth grade year, like in addition to what you had talked about, like needing to find your place within that community, that led you on like a path that maybe you didn't know then, but you're going on now?
So I would actually have to say it is probably um, needing to, at the time, feel like at times I felt like I had to shine, I had to be something for others to approve of. And at times it got exhausting. And when being someone who there were so few of us who were actually brown-skinned girls, that there was this experience of really needing to understand who I was, the value that I brought in my unique identity. And I feel like those imprints are ones that have shaped who I am. At the time, my mother was a civil rights attorney. And when I look back at the women in my family, I actually found a picture of my great grandmother who was actually a teacher at 14 in a one-room schoolhouse. And it's almost this memory or thought that created an imprint on me that this is a part of who I am. Like, this is a part of how my family has shown up in the world. And although then, experiences happen for you, but you don't always realize how much of an impact that it now shapes. I'm a business owner who travels the country encouraging people to understand the power of belonging, helping adults understand how toxic stress and trauma impact the lives of young people, and how we actually have the power and influence to literally shape the trajectory of their lives. I've always been that leader figure. So being out in the front, being a podcaster, being an advocate, all of those things I think have been shaped and imprinted, even though I didn't realize it with those experiences then. They absolutely, as I look back, I realize, oh, that really impacted me or imprinted me.
Yeah, and you never know like what those are going to be, and every time we talk to an adult, they have that kind of, maybe they didn't know it at the time, but all of those different things you talked about kind of led to that. But one of the things that you mentioned, um, that I kind of like, and it's I think this is a common thing for ninth graders to kind of overcome, is like that being something for others to approve of. And especially, you're talking about your unique situation where, you're one of only four Black students at your school at this in the environment. And then it's like, how do you're out there training and doing this stuff now. how would you say that like your experiences, and I know we had talked previously and you talked about an experience with a ninth grader at a school kind of close to us, in Pottstown. But like, what would you say like that? Is it the same kind of, students struggling with that, finding someone to like be something to approve of to other people, like when your interactions with young people or the people that are working with young people?
So honestly, Chris, I would say it doesn't matter what age you are. If we're honest, even adults still struggle with this. But I think if you really get grounded, the younger you are, and getting grounded and recognizing that you are a unique human being and that you are not here to impress other people. You are not here to match other people, that comparison is actually the thief of your joy. If you focus on your own journey and recognize that you are here to be the unique impact that you are, the more you settle into that, the more you actually have the opportunity to identify your gifts and truly create the unique imprint that is yours. The more we're looking to the left or the right or finding just the right filter to fit into other people, you're missing the opportunity to recognize that what is unique about you is your superpower. And if we could lock into that, there's an opportunity for us to give other people permission to lock into their superpower as well.
So I like what you said there about that and finding like yourself and you're a unique human being. We just recently were doing something here at the school where ninth graders were filling out, like, we asked them what their keys to success were, in the first couple months of the school year. And the number one thing, and then the list was developed from, we took it from like the John Wooden pyramid of success and all the words that are in there. And the number one word that kids identified with as being successful, and as of the end of November, was confidence. And there's a lot of great words on that list, but I was kind of surprised that confidence came up as number one, just because it wasn't be the first thing that I would think of, that like thinking about making a successful student. So how would you say like confidence kind of ties in with that idea of like finding yourself and as a unique person?
Well, it ties directly to standing in your power. So when I think about confidence, it's understanding that my voice has value and it has power and it has influence. And learning that when I speak, I am influencing others and I am worthy of sharing my ideas. What I have to offer is valuable. And so for me, when I think about that word, I actually get it. When we think of how often there are so many things that can influence young people, to have them question their value and their voice. And especially in the times that we're in, where there's so many other influences, being able to stand in my power and know that I have value and begin to recognize that I am actually more capable than I even realize. And so being able to step out and challenge myself, take risks, do things that are new, learn things that are new, are all a part of adapting and moving in success. Because when you really pull back the layers of success, sometimes we think about success in comparison to others, when actually success is an opportunity for us to show up in excellence. Now, I want to break that down, because excellence, I'm not talking about perfection. Excellence is simply your ability to show up as the fullest version of yourself and moving the closest that you can to your full potential. That's excellence. It has
And
nothing to do with perfection.
And again, we didn't plan this exact part of our conversation, but in that survey, the second highest ranked thing was personal excellence. And the way that it was defined on our sheet was working as hard as you can to achieve your goals and be the best that you can be. So again, this is like, we're these common themes, and we'll get to some of the more specific stuff that you talk about in your talks in a little bit here. But again, like these kind of common threads, and again, that personal excellence. And we talked about that, and I even shared like a little quote with the kids as we're doing like our mentoring stuff about like, you can't really compare yourself to everyone else to be successful, because if you kind of do that, you'll never be a success, because there's always going to be somebody out there that has, more followers on TikTok, or makes more money, or has a bigger house, or cooler shoes, or what, all those things that like we tell the kids about, what they think success is, where in reality, what you're talking about is like being able to find yourself as a person, work as hard as you can. So I didn't mean to cut you off there, but it just, again, when we're talking about these things, it's like the getting the kids to kind of see the connection between like some of their answers, some of the things they responded. And I'll save the third one, because I think the third one's kind of an interesting one, but maybe, who knows, maybe you'll even bring it back up. But yeah, that concept of excellence is just, I don't know. I think when you hear that word excellence, it maybe it throws kids off because they don't think they can be, quote, excellent at something in ninth grade.
Right. Because I think sometimes the misconception is that excellence is somehow tied to perfection when it's not, it's tied to full potential.
And that's really kind of what we're shooting for. So just to finish up here with the top three list. So it was confidence number one, personal excellence number two, and then loyalty was number three for in terms of success. And loyalty on our thing was defined as staying true to your friends, family, and supporting them no matter what. So again, you even talked about this already, in your beginning, where you talked about your core group of four friends kind of, looking out for each other, holding each other accountable, kind of being there for each other. So how would you see loyalty kind of fitting into this big picture here of like a successful ninth grader, or kind of a transitioning ninth grader?
And you know what? It's so interesting how I knew nothing of your survey, but when I was thinking about what I wanted to encourage ninth graders around, one of the elements I thought about was building your network. And I know they may not necessarily use that word, but I think it's important because we have to be very intentional. Network is a word that's used to make sure that you are surrounding yourself with positive people who will encourage and support you, and they become a strong circle of friends, influences, mentors that can make all the difference in the world to how you continue to find direction. And so when you have a strong network, then loyalty naturally happens because you find like-mindedness, you find that fuel to continue to push and move forward even when things get hard. You find people that you can depend on. You find people that will give back to you in the same way you are giving to others. So loyalty naturally shows up when you're building a network, not just a group of followers, but a network that is filled with positive people who don't always have to just be the same age you are, but will absolutely see you for who you are and continue to help you move forward.
Yeah, because one of the things that I often talk to kids about in our classes is like I always draw the example of like when they're doing picking groups to work with, and all the time they want to work with their friends. And I always tell them like there are people here that that I work with that I want to hang out with on a Friday night. They're fun, but I know that if we got together to attempt to do work that really mattered for something, that I could not work with those people because they would be too distracting. We wouldn't be able to get things done. So like even something as small as that, as picking picking people to work with in a group versus like, you have aspirations to be a Division I athlete, but your friends don't necessarily feel that way. Like, finding those people is definitely a tough challenge, especially as a ninth grader where you may not really know what you want to do, but you kind of understand the importance of having good people around you to kind of get you to that finish line point or wherever you're trying to get to.
Chris, honestly, the older we get, when we recognize that we can't actually do anything significant alone. It is going to require anything that we create, do, or impact the world with. It really is going to be driven by the people that are around us. So it just helps them to get a footing or a step forward before they get to where we are.
Yeah. And to round out the top five, just kind of since we've kind of now gone down this road, the last two that kind of tie in, and you also mentioned that a little bit with loyalty, are the last two were patience and honesty. And patience with our thing was defined as like staying calm in frustrating situations, which applies to basically any age person. And then the last one was honesty, like finding telling the truth to others no matter what. And you're talking about finding that circle of people. And a lot of times, there's got to be somebody within that circle that's going to tell you the truth. And, it seems like a lot of times when you see in public, like the more successful people are, the less they have those kind of people around them. But then when you get the person that's really like super successful, they always have like, people in that inner circle that are gonna be like, no, that's a terrible idea, those kinds of things. So, finding even those two things that go along with developing that kind of student outlook, I think is really important too. So how do you think that like patience and honesty kind of tie it all together for like what we've been talking about so far?
Well, I'd like to speak to honesty first because I feel like um, as we think about some of the largest influencers for our younger generations around social media, the impact of the internet, it's recognizing we are craving truth, honesty, like what can we really understand to be true so that we can live the highest versions of our life. And so searching or scanning social media and influences for like what is truth, like put down the filter, what's real about you or like how much of this story you just put out there is really the full story around how you grew into that position. So I get it. I think we're all hungry for honesty. And then going back to patience, I love that that's on the list because one of the things I wanted to encourage ninth graders around is recognizing that you're on a growth journey and to be patient, to recognize that you are good enough right where you are and that you are going to feel stressed at sometimes. Positive stress is actually a good thing that will continue to move you forward in growth experiences. But give yourself grace, give yourself understanding. Give yourself permission to make mistakes. Be patient with yourself and your growth journey because this is all a part of it, of you becoming a whole, healthy, impactful, and powerful human being and adult.
So what would you say to, the student or a ninth grader that says the people around me are not necessarily as patient as you would hope that they would be as you're kind of going through this journey? And I know that like a lot of times that there's a lot of outside pressures on academics or athletics or just lots of performance, especially on our high school kids. So what kind of strategies or recommendations would you give to either the high schooler or the adult in the situation of like to kind of get them to understand that, mistakes happen, that maybe, the fourth play in the game and the third week of the season isn't the end of the world, like that kind of stuff?
Right. So actually, my answer is the same for both the ninth grader, the parent, the educator, or just the adult who wants to make an impact on the lives of others. When you hit a moment and you feel that stress response happen or that fear response rise up in you, and you want to rush past the moment, or you want to make the moment something that it actually isn't, or you're frustrated about the mistake, or you're writing this internal narrative that is toxic and actually not helpful for your growth experience because you're impatient about what is happening in front of you, I actually encourage you to pause and get honest with yourself around what are you believing about this moment. I'll take your example. If I made a mistake in a play and the outcome was not what I wanted it to be, if I'm now ruminating, frustrated, I am impatient because I haven't gotten that move correct in that play yet. If I'm frustrated and I'm angry and I'm ruminating over that, I ask you to pause and actually go behind the emotion. And in the moment, ask yourself, what am I believing about me in this moment? Am I believing that this moment is defining what I am capable overall in this sport? Am I believing that other people think that I'm a failure and therefore I have to put on a mask or press past it or fight about what I believe someone else is saying about me? It's actually pulling back the layers to what are you believing about that moment. For the parent who is losing patience with the change in the behavior or the growth, I pause and challenge you. What are you believing about what's possible for that student, for your young person? If you're afraid that this moment is going to define their future, it's not going to. If you're believing that other people are believing something about them that's not true, the most important belief is what you believe, not them. It's when we find impatience, it's rooted in fear. It's a fear response first. So it's pulling back the layers. What are you believing and what has you afraid? And speak to that fear so that it does not continue to stay in the driver's seat.
And a lot of what you're talking about, it sounds like I know one of the other topics you speak on, like, in addition to the trauma experiences, like confidence and resilience in like children and like how that kind of works. So it sounds exactly like I would assume that your talks about that go, where it's, talking about that mindset, that ability to kind of compartmentalize things and kind of move forward with the idea that like you have a lot of life to live and that really there's not one perfect way to do it. And I think having people all around see that, especially for a ninth grader, when they feel like, no matter what you say, the kid's still going to feel like, oh man, I
Mhm.
can't believe I let my team down, or I did this, or I did that, or, I got a 65 on a test when, parents think I'm going to bring home a 90. Like those kind of conversations happen all the time. So finding that way to move past it and learn from it, I think is such a crucial thing that's kind of missing from schools a lot because we're so focused on grades and outcomes and those kinds of things as opposed to like the process and the destiny and the journey as opposed to the
Yeah.
destination.
And if we really understand the brain science behind resilience, that resilience isn't something you have or you don't have. It is actually a developmental process that is strengthened over time with opportunities of practice. So, with each experience in which we experience something, we don't bounce back, we bounce forward. We take that experience. If we're given room to process the truth about it, and discard what's not true about it. We take that and then bounce forward to the next developmental experience. Each is a developmental process that will build skills, it'll build characteristics, it will build attributes, but it's strengthened with opportunities of practice.
And that's really the goal of learning everything is like kind of the same way you learn any other sort of skill or, you know, you said that it's not something that's inherently there. Just like that athlete is going to go out the next day and they're going to go to practice and they're probably going to practice that same thing that they missed multiple times. And then hopefully the next time they're encountered in that situation, they can then overcome that mistake and do it correctly in the same way where you just do that in your life. Hopefully, you know, if you learn and can build that resiliency, then the next time you come into that situation, then you can probably stop and think and go into that mindset of thinking like all the other things that you were talking about. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So one of the things, and we've been talking for a while now, and we didn't even really get into like the big reason why I did ask you to come on, which was you did a training for us on trauma informed training and what that
Mhm,
means.
mhm.
And this setting is, we could probably spend the whole podcast series on that issue alone. But, the very basics of like going through trauma, and we had talked in a previous episode about adverse childhood experiences. And, I think one of the things that I would like you to kind of talk about is like how there's a lot more kids, students that go through these things than they realize. Like, obviously no one's going around advertising their trauma,
Mhm.
but I think a lot of us have that. So what would you say as a ninth grader, somebody that's coming to a new environment? Maybe they've dealt with this situation before getting here. Maybe they're dealing with it currently. How does that fit into the overall picture of developing into a successful or like a high school student?
Yeah, so that is a whole podcast by itself, Chris.
Yeah.
I think when we recognize that adverse childhood experiences are pervasive. So it's not a particular group or type of person. It literally is pervasive if we recognize, especially post-pandemic, that there are so many of us statistically. There is a huge percentage of human beings who have gone through something or are going through something. It challenges us to begin to practice how we're actually listening to one another. Because when I experience something that is difficult, and I shared with the educators that someone else cannot define whether or not my experience was hard. So trauma is in the eyes of the person who experienced it. It is complex. It is how I experienced it at the moment in time, the age that I was, and with all of the other experiences that I had. So no one else can look at what I've gone through and put a value on it. It is how I'm looking at the world and then understanding that when I show up as the most authentic version of myself, and other people allow me to be who I am. And I continue to test experiences where people are actually listening to me. It creates a safety response that counterbalances the trauma or the stress response. So when we think about the building blocks of healthy relationships, there are five, but the bottom two that stabilize healthy relationships are safety and trust. And in every experience, our brain is scanning environments for those two things. So, how, as I am an adult who wants to foster a healthy relationship, I'm a person, I'm a ninth grader, and I'm looking for an opportunity to grow, even in the face of what I've been through. First, I want to put a pin there. You're still here. So that means you already have resilient skills. You're still here. So there is more for you to do, and you can grow from this. It's making sure you're writing your own internal narrative that just because something happened, it does not define where you are going. And every adult and person you encounter must believe the same thing, that just because someone has come from a certain background, they've come from a certain family, they've come from a certain group, they've come from a certain neighborhood, they've experienced a certain thing, that thing does not define their destiny. And will I create space that allows them to feel safe and they find trusted relationships that will also support their ability to feel heard, not just um, having someone share something, you're rushing to try and figure out what they're talking about so you can give them their solution. Is actually operating from a strategy we call heart-centered listening, so that I'm actually listening in a way that I'm communicating, I see you and I want to understand your perspective.
And I like, I'm glad you ended with the listening part because when you said that at the beginning, I wrote that down and I wanted to come back around to that because I think listening is a really hard skill. And now we're talking for everybody, but if you're in a ninth grade, you're kind of, new to listening and what are you listening for? So, like, two questions and you can kind of take them however you want. Like, how do you be a good listener? And two, how do you, if you're experiencing this trauma or if you have experienced it, or just in general, how can you be a good communicator of that so that people will listen? And I'm not saying like not believe in like a situation where something's happened and be like, no, I don't believe that, but like saying it so that somebody will actually stop and listen and process it.
Yeah. So I think first, in both of those, how you become a good listener. And I appreciate that you're asking this question because people don't truly recognize that as a culture, we don't listen well. We think we do, but we actually aren't listening well. And when we pull back the layers to understand that in order to listen, I first must acknowledge my own gut response to what's being said and to communicate what I need to share, I must first acknowledge how I am activated or how my stress level, where my stress level is. So the first step for both the listener and the speaker is to establish a strategy that will help you get grounded first when you are activated. If I'm listening and what I'm listening to has activated me, has triggered me, or I have a gut response to it, I've already shut off listening. I'm now running through my mind what my response is going to be instead of taking a moment and using a strategy that will allow me to acknowledge that I've been activated by what someone's sharing. If I need to share something in order to get to a place of where I'm communicating what I need and support from the person, then it's also I need to identify, how am I going to take a breath? Am I going to drink a glass of cold water first? Am I going to stretch? Do I need to listen to a song that will have me grounded? I need to use a strategy that brings my body into a grounded sensory, by my senses being grounded and safe so that I can communicate not out of an activated place, not out of fear, not out of agitation or big emotion, which will often have people not listen because they're focused on the behavior. It's recognizing, how can I begin to develop a sensory diet that will allow me to use strategies that will calm my center down so that I can communicate clearer and help me be a better listener so I can fully see the person and strive to understand what they are trying to share with me.
And I think, those are great strategies. And coming back to our list here from the beginning, um, that goes along with things like being patient. And then another thing that came up, and it wasn't as high on the list, but it was pretty high, was like this idea of like friendship and listening. And like when you're in these groups, you want to feel like you're being heard. And, you have these kinds of situations where maybe the things that you're expressing are not the easiest to express, or being a listener, like being on the listening end of somebody's trauma. It's, we have, it's funny, we have a therapy dog here at the school. And like some days you can kind of see by the end of the day, like the dog is just like, looks like it just wants to go to sleep because, it's dealing with all of the people coming up to it. And I know we're not comparing, human emotions to the dog emotions, but it's kind of similar. Like if you're the person that's the go-to person to listen all the time, it does get exhausting to like listen and want to be empathetic and express to people. And especially as a student here at the high school, I would say that that's also a challenge to do that with your peers, because you don't want to look like, different, or, come across in certain ways if you're expressing certain emotions. So I think there's a lot of things to unpack there, and things that students can work on and things that they can work on. One of the things is I remember you said this, and I don't know if it exactly ties into what you were saying, but
Mhm.
and one of the things you encouraged us as adults to do was to create a safety plan. And
Yeah.
I don't know if like all of this listening and the communication comes in with the safety plan, but it sounds like a lot of the things that you mentioned were very similar, like, making sure that you're in the correct headspace. If you feel that you're not, like, figuring out ways to get through that. But as we kind of wind down here, like, what does it mean, and how is your interpretation of creating that safety plan something that a student at any age, but obviously we're focusing on ninth graders, how can a student use that kind of concept to get themselves in a situation where they recognize that maybe they are agitated, not able to communicate effectively, or not in a spot to listen effectively either?
Mhm. Yeah, so I actually recommend a safety plan for everyone. So we're talking about an actual emotional safety plan. And I've given your education staff some resources, both the adult version and the student version. And so I encourage students, if they would like to explore this more, the educational staff have access to the resource that I shared. So, with that being said, if we recognize our emotions are not separate from our body, and when we, going back to something I shared earlier, when we allow ourselves to pause and actually reconnect with how is this, what am I believing about this moment, where am I feeling this in my body, when we allow ourselves to recognize I am activated, and if I start talking now, I'm going to be yelling at everyone. When we begin to normalize across the board, students and adults alike, normalize this conversation of an emotional safety plan, it makes it more accessible for students to have the common conversation of, you know what, wait a minute. I wrote down and agreed that whenever I am feeling activated, overwhelmed, if you remember those dots, when I'm feeling the pressure here in my temples, or when I feel my heart is racing, or when I feel the tension in my shoulders, I've made an agreement that I'm going to do one of 3 to 5 things, whether it's take a moment to listen to some music, get some water, all of those things. When we normalize those as a consistent part of how we engage with one another, then we have already conquered the first step in being open to listening to one another.
And you referenced the dots, and the activity that we did with the dots was you were supposed to identify places in your body where, the stress or other symptoms would manifest itself, whether it's, headaches, lower back pains, all the other stuff. And it was me that answered this, so that's why I bring it up. But one of the questions was, what you're supposed to look around the room and take notice of everybody, and everybody had a dot. Everyone, all the adults in the room had dots. And I'm sure if you did the same thing with students, if they were willing to participate in the same way that adults would, they would all mention that they have those dots as well too. And
Mhm.
that's kind of one of those things to remember, when we're dealing, like we talked about, with trauma informed training, and dealing with those kinds of things, that students bring their own dots all the time. And that's kind of something that they need to understand, that we need to understand. And kind of, I think some of the information you've given us today here helps us to begin to understand that, and kind of what to do. And, like we said, there's a lot of strategies, and sometimes it's finding the strategies that work best for you. But I think recognizing the dots and recognizing that stuff, I think, is a huge part of the whole experience here.
I love that we've brought that in. I was hoping we would, because I feel like as a ninth grader, you're the from a phrase back in my age, you're the new kid on the block, right? So you recognizing that, yes, you, the ninth grader, and yes, that senior, you all have dots. You all have dots. And so if we normalize this conversation of navigating stress in a healthy way. It gives everyone permission to do what they need in a healthy way to be regulated, focused, and more connected.
And I like that. And I think we'll kind of end at that spot. And just kind of a final question that we kind of always ask, like, there's so many things that you've talked about that could be like a tip or a strategy or a takeaway for a ninth grade student or a parent or somebody listening. But if we were only having a 1 minute TikTok level conversation, like, what is the one thing that you would recommend for a ninth grade student to do in order, like, we'll even use what we talked about earlier, to be successful in their transition from middle school to high school and beyond? What would you say would be that one piece that you think would be important for them to master?
Taking care of yourself, mind, body, and emotions. It should become your priority to identify what you need to be well, because you cannot operate academically, socially, at your fullest version of yourself if you are depleted. So begin to learn what it is that helps you operate from a well place, whether that's water, that's food, that's being able to sleep well, that is creating your safety plan and using it consistently, that's your network. You being well will drive your impact and how you show up as the fullest version of yourself.
And it's a great message to leave on, especially here. We're coming up to the holidays. We have midterm exams coming up, all these different things that will kind of all tying together, may create their own stresses. And I think, really impactful words there. So as we're kind of finalizing here, is there anywhere where you would direct our listeners, whether they're students, parents, anyone, to find out more information about this, or, even, obviously you're going to talk about your own stuff, but like even stuff that would be geared towards students as well too?
Mm-hmm. So there are several resources. If you are an adult, if you're a parent, I would actually, shameless plug, I would encourage you to go to my website, which is livingstrongllc.com. We have lots of resources around refill. I have an ebook that if you go there, you can download the ebook, get access to several of the strategies I just shared here. For young people, I would actually encourage you to let me see. You know what, Chris, can I send you a resource after we're done? Because I think about, for them, there's lots of books and tools that they could use, but I really want something that is more user-friendly and easier for them to digest. So let me think on that. But initially,
Yeah.
I have a podcast that talks about the flip side of adversity. Every week, we're having a conversation around how do you make a flip to the other side of what you've been through. My Refill Soul Care Academy website is on as a link accessible from my master page. And I want to actually pull together a couple of things for you to be able to attach with this podcast when it goes out for the students to be able to look through.
Well, we appreciate that. And a lot of times, just we're always kind of giving kids resources, but I think anytime I don't think there's ever not enough resources. And especially on a topic like this, it's kind of, pretty delicate. And, I think kids are going through this all the time, and maybe they just want to find different ways or different approaches. And, hopefully listening to you and those kinds of things will kind of allow them to think maybe that you could be somebody that could be a resource for them, or just kind of like can provide good resources. So Dr. Veirdre Jackson, thank you very much for taking the time out to join us on this episode. So much information for us to kind of think about. So I appreciate you being here, and thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Chris. I truly appreciate the opportunity.